Hold on. And y'all let me know if somebody waves funny, if my volume, hold on. Begins to go out again. So y'all can hear me well at this particular point?
Yes.
Okay. Starting again. Professor Baruti Katembo, a mathematician, is the author of the 2001 book Elephants in a Bamboo Cage and several other publications about optimizing resource use, potential, and cultural leverage in Pan-African communities. His new book, released in March 2012, is entitled Scattered Assets, How African-American and Other Resources Can Shape 21st Century Pan-African Empowerment. Formerly, he served as a mathematician, a mathematics faculty member at Edward Waters College, and also directed the college's faculty think tank, the Ujuzi Group. Additionally, Professor Katembo is an alumnus of North Carolina A&T University and North Carolina State University at the undergraduate and graduate level. Next, we have Professor Sonja Lanehart, who is a Brackenridge Endowed Chair in Literature and in Humanities at the University of Texas in San Antonio. Teaching and research areas of interest are sociolinguistics, language and literacy in the African-American community, language and identity, English language variation, and standardization. Dr. Lanehart has published on all of the above interests. She is also a past co-editor with Paul Schutz, if I'm saying that correct, of Educational Researcher, Research News and Comment Section, the lead journal of the American Educational Research Association, which is delivered to more than 23,000 members. She is also a past book review editor of American Speech. She is also the author of Sister, Speak, Black Women Kinfolk Talk About Language and Literacy, University of Texas Press, 2002. Next, we have Brother Lasana Omar Hotep, who is a consultant, educator, and researcher committed to providing insight and practical strategies in the arenas of community development, student engagement, and organizational efficiency. Lasana is currently the lead consultant of Hotep Consultants, is the program coordinator for the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, and a graduate student in the history program at Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. Lasana has contributed chapters to several publications, including African-American Men in College, The State of Black Arizona, Be a Father to Your Child, Real Talk from Black Men of the Hip Hop Generation, the Black Male Handbook, A Blueprint for Life. Oh, and Icons of Black America. As a filmmaker, Lasana is the writer and producer of Trending Race, Shaping and Embracing Black and Brown Identity, a film that explores identity in African-American and Latino communities. And last but not least, we have Stephanie Coleman. And Ms. Coleman is the co-founder of Houston-based Tre magazine. She is accomplished in both publishing, direct marketing, and strategic branding. As a founder of Neutral Gray Advertising, she has developed and launched many successful campaigns for a variety of clients within the United States and around the world. After over 15 years in New York, her career includes both corporate and creative agencies, and her clients have included Microsoft, Essence, Mercedes, Carnegie Hall, the Anti-Defamation League, the Lincoln Center, AT&T, and the United Nations, just to name a few. And I am your host, Asar Imhotep. I'm just an overall good guy. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this particular panel discussion. I want to first start off and show two video clips, if we have the time, and then I want to get all of your responses to these two particular clips, and then we'll kind of, round robin off of there. So hold on one second. I'm about to. Are y'all seeing my screen or my desktop as of yet? No?
Yeah. It's just
Okay, can you see my desktop now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, the first clip I'm going to show is from Dr. Naeem Akbar, who's a clinical psychologist out of Florida A&M University in Florida. So, can y'all hear the volume as well?
First of all, sitting in a world where a generation of people, and it's a paradox here, that we have a generation of young people who are the successful fulfillment of the victory of our work. And in doing so, we have created a monster. And the monster is that in making the way open for them, we have given them an option that we never had. They are the first generation of Africans who have the option not to be black. The first generation. Every other generation had to be black. Either by segregation, by slavery, by coercion, by ghettoizing.
Audio. You can't hear it anymore. I can't either. I'm going to get a speaker.
So y'all can't hear it at all?
No.
Okay, well, that sucks. Well, I don't know how to address that at this particular moment, but I will just say this. Dr. Naeem Akbar is basically talking about...
I can't really hear you either, Asar. I can hear your voice get really low.
So you can't hear my voice at all again?
I can hear you, but it's really low. Yeah. Check to make sure. Oh, now I don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. There you go. Oh, that's perfect.
Okay. I have no idea why it keeps doing that. But basically, the clip is of Dr. Naeem Akbar, and he, at the time, I think this was taken in 2007, 2008, where he's coming across young people who, of the African-American or African diaspora descent, who have the option, quote unquote, not to be black. And so the whole thing is about identity. I wish y'all could hear it. To get yeah. And so the second clip I was going to show was of two young men who recently recorded on the CNN, I guess, video blog about how they're not African Americans because they have no association with Africa itself. And so I guess I can edit that later into the discussion for everybody who is going to be listening to this. But the discussion today is about African American identity, and we want to discuss that and hopefully get into how identity can be the basis, or ask the question, is identity the basis of power in human social systems? So I guess the first question I want to start off with is, how do you as individuals define yourself in an ethnic and a socio-ethnic context, and what are your reasoning? So I will just go down the list. I'll just go with Brother Baruti, that particular question. So go ahead, Brother Baruti.
Okay, thank you. I can basically go about a series of different identification and labeling. One is African, because I look at African as talking about our historical homeland and reference and overall culture. I can use the term Bantu because I think that many of the particular words and customs that have survived in the United States come from Bantu speaking peoples and languages specifically. Also, the word black as a general reference for us to denote in an abstract way us as opposed to other people that connect us on a global basis regardless of particular geography and specific ethnicity. And then also within the United States, African-American as a geopolitical term that may in some cases represent us within this country as well as to other people who are looking at the United States as a nation and would like to refer to us in terms of our race and / nationality as we exist in the United States. For all four.
All right. Brother Lasana?
I simply personally identify when I'm asked to identify culturally as an African. I don't go into a variety of other explanations. I mean, simply I'm an African person because of my ancestral heritage and my lineage. And if you want to use various paradigms based on race, I come from the African race. As far as my nationality and my ethnic background, African-American, I accept that reality that I come part of a unique experience, lived experience here in the Western Hemisphere, in North America, in the United States of America. Also for practical purposes, of course, I'm a citizen of the United States of America. I travel abroad. My passport, I'm treated as an American, whatever that is. So I'm clear on that, but I don't go into a whole bunch of other explanations. So the way I would separate mine is that not asked what I am, I say I'm an African, but I know the other terms that are associated with that, and Black, African-American, etc. And I respond to those contextually, but I'm crystal clear on how I present myself to the world.
All right. Sister Sonja?
I sort of divide it in a couple of ways. I think of African American as an ethnicity, and so it implies that I am an African in America. And then racially, I accept the term black because I think black refers to the diaspora of all those people who descended from Africa. So that's the simplest way I think I can present it.
All right. Sister Stephanie?
Well, I guess I am in a spot where I consider myself at best lost, okay, and in search of truth. So when I talk to people who need definition, I'm often sort of blurring the lines. I'm the African-American Black Negro from Texas today, because it's not, even saying African doesn't really connect me back to my true origins in terms of sort of regional places within the continent. And I think until I understand and learn and we get some real names that we define, it's hard to really pick one. So I do know sort of legally and physically where I am. I know ethnically where I'm from, but in terms of reappropriating names that others have put on us and reappropriating them again, I haven't quite found the one that fits. So I just kind of roll with the room.
I see. So it appears that we have a wide range of associations. The general consensus is that, at least for the majority of the people on the panel, they would accept African American as an ethnic identifier for them. But we have one who says Black in terms of color, in terms of, race and identity. And then we have Brother Lasana with, he uses the broader term African. And then Brother Baruti, he uses a variety of different connotations, including Muntu, or Bantu being the plural form, which is a common identifier for the majority of people, excuse me, in Africa, which is a word that simply means human being. But
at home, I often refer to myself to my husband as the former young Nubian princess that he married, but that's just a home term.
Yeah. Well, for me, I accept African American. I have no problems with it. Ultimately, but at the same time, I have written a publication called the Bakala of North America, the Living Sons of Vitality, in search of a meaningful name for African Americans. And in this, throughout my journey, in trying to understand who we are, I haven't come across terms that are from the minds of us when it came to defining us. And so what I attempted to do was to scour African languages to find a term that I felt best fit the personality and the history of African Americans, and to present it to the African American population for discussion and hopefully adoption. And so, when I go out and I talk about my ethnicity, usually I promote, I am a Mukala or Nkale, which is, in one can argue, means, children or person of the sun, and it has some other metaphoric and real extensions, which, that the book goes into detail as far as that's concerned. But that's just me. That's what I've been promoting. Because I personally have an issue with my ethnicity simply being described as a color. And there's some other clips that I sent to the panel earlier for them to view and to digest. And, there's various different discussions going on in various different associations in terms. And so I want to ask the panel, why is there there seems to be some confusion in terms of who we are and what we call ourselves? And also, why do you think that there are, now the people of the younger generation, and I don't know what younger generation, is properly defined as. I'm 32 years old. So, I consider younger generation, maybe like 22, 23, on down or whatnot. And so, yeah, they consider me old. So I'm already being addressed as sir, and it's funny to me. So I'm officially, and I have a few gray hairs coming in, right here. So biologically, the universe is telling me that I'm getting up there in age. So, so the younger generation, there's, which is why the Na'im Akbar clip was important, is disassociating themselves with the term African American. Some are disassociating with the term Black altogether. They're just American. And so we're trying to, formulate ideas of why is there this disassociation with the association with blackness or Africa for this concept, that has yet to be defined as an American. So I will, if y'all remember everything that I just said, I will, now throw it to y'all, to whoever wants to try to tackle that first. I'll let y'all
I'll say, from a branding point of view, I think a beautiful job has been done in rebranding who we are and making it a negative. So if you're talking about sort of the mental art of distortion, we have been sold this perception of what it is for the continent of Africa, what it is for the color. And there are people who, if you've never seen a positive image, then why would you want to be associated with it in general? And so instead of fighting this nationalism movement from the outside, you kind of change it so from the inside, people don't want to be remotely affiliated with that. It's not that you don't want to be black, but you don't want to be what the stereotypes and the stigmas say that it is to be black. It's not that you don't want to be from Africa, but you don't want all of those horrible, horrible, horrible scenes that you see on TV to be affiliated with your lineage. So the only good images American students have seen have been of non-people of color. So that's what they want to show. I, too, can be that. I, too, am not a burden to the system. I, too, have a great legacy. Let's cut off all that past. But if they knew their excellence, if they knew their legacy, if they knew their origins and contributions, they wouldn't want to be anything else. And I think that is our responsibility as media, as educators, and as informed, to let them find beauty in their origins, and then they wouldn't be running from them. They would be running to them. So that's
I'll go with Sister Sonja, then we'll get to you, Baruti.
I think I have a slightly different opinion because I don't think it's specific to African Americans. I think that you could probably find a wide swath of people who could probably say the same thing, and I think it's probably as prominent among young. I think it's probably an age demographic, not a racial demographic, because I think you would find whites who would probably say something similar, and part of that just has to do with this. We're part of a global society, right? And so it's a larger sort of grouping than specific to me. Many whites already have issues with defining themselves as white, seeing that as an identity. I think it's really easy to just say that I'm American. I think it takes out the complexities of our sociocultural and historical context. That is true. I definitely agree with you there. But I'm not sure that their identification in that particular way and trying to articulate it really goes that deep. It might, but I just see it as a generational thing, not necessarily a racial difference here.
All right, Brother Baruti.
I was initially going to piggyback on something that Stephanie said, and that is, I think that in this society particularly, I think that the word Africa and African has been made the most negative. And throughout the early books of Europeans, particularly in the Arabs too, in so-called medieval times, all through their books have been ideas about Africa as being negative, and African people being cursed by God as an entity why we should have been slaves and why we are an inferior people. And therefore, I think anthropologically, the African has been made most negative. Images of Africa are extremely negative, bearing on to the idea of why we as Black people are African people. sometimes have some reticence about being classified as African. So I would say, in a nutshell, that we must find a way to reject ourselves such that we, Africa and its history and what it has to offer us as a resource, even if we have had that projected into the United States, to build upon a foundation. Since we're here also, then we represent one of the cultures of this country, and therefore it should be projected with the kind of positiveness that makes us a first-rate citizen, as opposed to thinking of ourselves as an appendix.
All right, Brother Lasana.
I'm going to take a little bit different kind of perspective. What we're seeing today is the result of a broader, longer, more trajectory of this racialization project. Some people refer to it as the hegemonic project, of where this concept of whiteness, concept of what it means to be white has been set as a standard and as a universal and as a default. And so, therefore, not only has the standard been set through images, through various forms of media, but in forms of relationship to power. And there's like a pigmentocracy, there's like a hierarchy in the society we live in the world that has set a tone for cultural identity. And it's not just about perceived images of stereotypes. There's also about where can I derive power? Where can I garner or leverage or position myself to have an identity that has something to do with power? And Mel Irvin Painter talks about this a lot in her book on the history of white people, how they formed this social identity of hodgepodge and all that kind of stuff, kind of pulling from Stephanie's comment about how she really can't directly know, or she doesn't really directly know what part of the continent her ancestry may have come from, so she kind of yields there and says, may do a regional thing, hey, I'm a Texan, I'm this, I'm that. But whiteness was never liked, and whiteness was not garnered for racialized purposes. It was the racialization project was garnered for political and economic purposes. And so I say all that to say that the discussion that Dr. Akbar kind of facilitated in that talk about quote unquote creating moms and this first generation that has to quote unquote choose what it means to be black, I think there's a part of that discussion that's being left out. And the part of that discussion that's being left out, that in the case of the United States of America, we live in a nation state, and religion is a free market enterprise. And free market enterprise works best when people see themselves as individuals. And so when people feel like they can have a customized experience, a customized product, it's just me. I'm just Daryl. I'm not black. I'm not American. I don't have a gender. I don't have a sexuality. I'm just Daryl. Whatever that means, and people can make Daryl think that he's independent, not interdependent, not part of a society, that there's a product that we can push towards Daryl, then that kind of society thrives off of that. And what we're witnessing now, and Dr. Lanehart touched on as far as the age, is because now the project of individualizing people has advanced. So what we're seeing is a nation of this constant project in this country has constant package these individualized kinds of personalities and identities. And therefore you create this certain kind of individual in a society that you can market and sell things to. And so it's a lot more I want to touch on. I don't want to monopolize time, but that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a trajectory of this hegemonic racialization project, which has ended with this whole customized identity project that leads to this economy.
All right, some very potent words. I just want to remind y'all that, even though I am the host of this particular dialogue, that this is a dialogue. So at any point, y'all want to ask each other profound about what, one another has said, please feel free to do so. There's supposed to be a feature here where you can quote unquote raise your hand. I haven't come across it, so I don't know how to tell you how to do it. But,
I did see that.
I don't want to.
I don't think you can do it in the full screen.
I see.
I just raised my hand. Do you see it?
No, I don't see. I don't see anything. And I'm in full screen mode, so I have to exit full screen. I see you. Yeah, I see your hand when I'm not in the full screen mode. Okay. Well, I guess we have to do it the old school way.
I guess we'll be doing some editing.
I just raised my hand. Did you see it?
I heard it.
I can only see it when I'm not in full screen mode. So if I'm right now I'm in full screen mode, so I can't see. But I heard someone say they had a question for somebody.
Yeah, I said I had a question for Lasana, at least for comment.
Yes, sir.
When you when you said talked about the term white being for a project to promote economic and political leverage, are you talking about the name white to be used beyond geography, but kind of like a pan-European term to leverage global dominance as opposed to geography and culture?
Yes, I argue that because of the fact every system where primarily Western Europe has been, they set up the thinking conference space with white at the top and everything else, and they they have various gradients of where you fit depending on if the British were in charge or the French or the Portuguese or what have you. But the reason why I make that statement in context to what we're talking about is because we're going to have to find some kind of value in whatever identity that we do as far as a diaspora or this as an ethnic group of African Americans. That's going to what is the privilege? What privileges and access do you have by picking this identity? The privilege and access that people get from having white identity is white privilege, which is being at the top of this pigmentocracy. And therefore, they may not have money, they may not have any kind of class, they may not have any savvy, but they can always say, I have whiteness. And when we're talking in the kind of society we live in today, and we're pulling a lot of, I have Senko from my chest, we're pulling a lot from indigenous cultures, but indigenous cultures were developed in a certain kind of context. And we're trying to create something now in this kind of context. And in my argument, when I talk about contemporary identity, is what kind of identity are we going to create that's going to create some kind of privilege and access that our people will get on board? Our people are not going to get on board anymore for sentimental reasons or for historical arguments or for the fact that we have a lineage. They want to say, what is the value of this identity? So right now they're being told this is more value of me being Darrow than me being black or me being African.
I'd like to add to that from an advertising point of view, which is how I think that is how this whole thing has been sold. Even when you sell a product, there is some power in the individual. And when you can get a collective group of individuals to buy into an idea that they are Portuguese, that they are French, or that they are Spanish, or that they are Texan, or that they're whatever, within those smaller groups come a collective understanding of a particular goal. Then within the leadership, you take those goals and you push them for something else. Caucasians don't all believe that they're related to Roseanne Barr or that Bill Clinton is their spokesperson. There isn't this kind of umbrella culture except for when these collective groups get together on a particular issue. And I think for the black race, it has always been this kind of one brush for describing who we are. But within it, there are so many beautiful nuances. If I was to look and say, what is it that drives me to find interest in my homeland, it is to find parts of me, parts of my creativity in it. If there is someone with a warrior spirit, then there's a certain part of that spirit that brings them home. And I think to allow us to see that we are multifaceted and that there are multi-interests that can bring us together, both individually and collectively. There has to be some sense of self so that you can buy into a group that reflects that sense of self. If you had a bunch of individuals who say, I like long eyelashes and lace front weaves, that might be her individually. But she will find that group that believes in those values. And I think that doesn't mean that we all do. It just means that we each have to have the opportunity to see, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's me.
All right. Anybody else want to address it?
Anybody want to expound on lace front weave? I love it. It's a metaphor, but I understand exactly where you're coming from.
It seems like what people are arguing in various different ways is that identity is attached primarily to two things: values and power.
Yeah.
So the question, and I'm pretty sure y'all know, but for the sake of discussion, the question is, what can we do, to bring value to the identities that, we ultimately decide to get? And how can we use that in real, tangible, measurable terms to develop, maintain, and protect our power, the power that we develop from the identity? So who wants to address that?
Identity is.
Mm-hmm.
So in my area of research, identity is sort of multifaceted, and it's not just how you see yourself or the groups you want to be a part of, but it's also how society sees you and how those groups that you want to be a part of, how those groups see you. So just because you want to identify as something doesn't mean that which you're trying to identify with accepts you as that identity. So,
absolutely.
For example, the people that you were talking about earlier who are, I'm going to say they're black, and they're saying, oh, I'm not African-American, they can say that all they want to, but if other people see them as African-American or black, then that's what they're going to be called, and that's how they're going to be perceived, and then that's how people will interact with them. So
absolutely.
It's a two-way street, and you can't just say, I'm opting out, because as part of being part of society, you're already going to be in that mesh, and so people are going to find you in some sort of way. But then also talking about identity as a development.
All right.
I think that's a very complicated thing, and it's something that happens over the course of our lifetimes, and it's something that we're continually doing. We're continually evolving in terms of the experiences that we have, these issues of identity in terms of how we see ourselves and how other people see us, the interactions that we have, and then those are continually defining and redefining, this idea of identity. So, for example, if you look at some of Cross and Town's work on talking about identity development, or Jessica DeClear, and other people, and looking at this, I'm trying to think of the guy at Michigan, Robert Sellers at the University of Michigan, in talking about this idea of what identity is. It's something that develops, and usually they talk about it in terms of stages, right? So it seems like some of the references that you've made to people have to do with people who are in different stages of their identity development, right? So if you had talked to me at 22 years old, I would have, of course, said, oh, I'm black, I'm African-American, of course, can't you see my skin color, brown paper bag test, all that stuff makes it pretty obvious, that kind of thing, and okay, that's what I am. But beyond that, it wouldn't have really meant anything to me. I mean, yes, I grew up in black neighborhoods, my family's black, I associate with black people like that, but it wouldn't have been salient for me necessarily, right? And then if you catch me, you can take me in 5-year increments. My identity was developing until where I am now, where where race and ethnicity are extremely salient for me, and one, because of how I see it operate in society and how people operate with me. You can look at, I guess looking at kids is a good example, and I have to be really, I'm really conscious of this when I'm talking with my son and trying to help him to understand that because he's biracial. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, you know, if you look at how people sort of perceive race and ethnicity, when kids are little, it's like all kids are cute, right? They're cute, adorable, they're non-threatening. It's when kids start moving into, and kids can say, oh, I don't see color, or yeah, he's brown and she's pink and she's whatever, and they can make those different shades. It's when kids start getting into middle school, when they're looking more like adults, right? They're losing their childhood and their babyness. Then people start reacting to them differently. So all of a sudden, that kid who had been cute and wonderful and just as adorable and cute as can be, it's like, okay, wait a second. I'm starting to see other features, right? I don't see kids first. Now I see, oh, look at that black teenage boy who's threatening or something like that, right? You start associating different things with them. And as other people are reacting to you in that way, that starts changing your identity or your perceptions about who you are, right? So you continually have that, and that's why I'm saying as you continue to grow older and have particular types of experiences, that impacts how you see yourself and how the world sees you as well. And there are also other things that can go into that in terms of your familiarity with cultural artifacts and those sorts of things as well. I do this from a linguistic standpoint. From a linguistic standpoint, definitely what Stephanie said is true. It's a heterogeneous group, even though there are several researchers who are not as many anymore, who sort of see us all as sort of one lump or one thing. We all talk the same. We all, okay. But there is some significance to talking about the experiences that we have and how we interact with different people outside of our group and inside of our group that help us to sort of formulate our identity and help that evolve over time as these are sort of reactionary things to some extent.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
Well, okay, our magazine is an urban magazine on the edge of gentrification, right? So physically, we're in this spot where we have an economic push that happens to have a cultural umbrella on top of it. As we started the magazine, people said, oh my gosh, don't use our neighborhood. Like Carlos has a nickname called Tre. It's 3rd Ward, it's like the 9th Ward. It's that kind of idea. You cannot use Tre because you won't have any value. You have to use Midtown. You have to bring in other people in because they said that because they cared that we would not be successful if we were ourselves. And that was a passionate and consistent push against the community and trying to save us from self-identifying. Then we did an issue on our football team. You know, this is urban, inner-city football team. And we have some socioeconomic blends in the group. And our mother they were ripping into their voice because they were trying to be the male and the female energy. And you aren't going to do nothing and blah, 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 blah. We did a beautiful photo story of those kids. And the same mothers who were yelling at their kids when they got the issue turned around and said, you can't behave like that anymore. Don't you see you're a role model? Don't you see that you're in this magazine? Don't you see that people are looking up to you? Don't you? So it isn't, I mean, I think we're extremely fortunate, the 5 of us, to either come from a lifestyle or a family situation that gives us a sense of self. For many of our community that we're bringing along on this journey, they don't have that sense of self. Their sense of self is often based on what they are told that they are being perceived as. That is why they struggle with trying to pass and trying to do what is necessary to not come across what they have been told they are, as opposed to just knowing, right? Like I know everyone here just kind of knows, and you can evolve, as opposed to waiting to see yourself in TV or in pictures to figure out what comes next. And there's that kind of marketing part that we have to consider for the masses as well.
All right. I'll ask this question to you, Brother Lasana, piggybacking on Sonja and Stephanie's commentary. For the record, if anybody ever is in a game show and they're asking what Asar Imhotep's favorite book in the world is, y'all will have to say Blueprint for Black Power by Dr. Amos Wilson. I think it is the greatest book on this earth. Roughly almost 900 pages this thick. As y'all can see, it's marked up and bookmarks and all this other kind of stuff. Just the first 5 chapters alone really kind of covers this discussion that we have here. But, it's one that stands out to me the most is the chapter on self-concept and self-identity and things of that nature. But more so, it goes into how, just in general, how the values of a subordinate group is shaped by a dominant group. And if the dominant group is defining the values and defining the nature of the subordinate group in non-life affirming in very pessimistic and devaluative terms, then the people tend to, and he's a psychologist, a clinical psychologist and business person who does it. So, he's dealing with the mind. So he argues with other citations that they've been set by the larger, more dominant group. And so when Dr. Lanehart was talking about that the society, quote unquote, will see you in a certain way, how do you, as a quote unquote minority group, force the largest society to see you how you want to be projected versus their perception of who you are? Is it even possible to change that paradigm, or will we always be victims to that they will be forced to see us in very dehumanizing, valueless ways? Will we always be considered a color, to people when they describe it as all it is to us when other folks see us is a skin color, or a shade of different colors, versus a particular value system and other forms of identities in which people try to project, when they know themselves and their culture and things of that nature. So, that's to the general panel, but I want Brother Lasana to respond to that.
First of all, Amos Wilson and Blueprint for Black Power, amongst other works, foundational text for what I do, what I have been doing. So I understand exactly where you're coming from as far as your reference to that book, what he's talking about. Short answer to your question, no. We're not permanently tied to others' perceptions of us and how people will respond to us. Power has been defined as the ability to create your own reality and have people respond to you as if it's their reality. So one example in the African-American context, farmers. Actually something that did not exist in the world prior. Technical difficulties.
Hold on. Yeah, when you were saying what you were saying, it did this long pause, and then you were cut out for a second. So I know you.
Okay, let me go back.
Yeah, go back to how you were defining power then, and then go.
All right. Oh, wow, I went that far. Power is the ability to create your own reality and have people respond to it as if it was their reality. So an example in the African-American context is farmers. Prior to 1966, farmers did not exist. And it didn't exist within a critical mass with the African-American people until well into the 80s. So it's some 20 years before it caught on per se, but it was something that was self-defining, self-determining, that people did not ask permission to do, and they did it, and they were able to get people to respond to a point to, even in the United States of America, they have a postage stamp for Kwanzaa, and now it's a global entity, and it's something that is respected within circles, within African communities, as well as in other communities, as a legitimate, even if it's on the part of the spectrum where people like to make fun of it and tease it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a part of, again, this project. So let me answer the question more generally how I want to answer, then get down to the nitty-gritty and let everyone else talk. We live in an anti-African world. And what we're seeing when we see these different sections, depictions, et cetera, they're deliberately put out in front of people within text, within video, within television, et cetera, in the various forms in which people derive information, because we're in this anti-African world, and the people who formulate the ideas and who train the minds, regardless of what cultural background the minds are from, are anti-African. And so you're seeing the result of this constant anti-African or anti-black, whatever kind of term people want to use. And that's what we're witnessing. So when Dr. Amos Wilson was talking about debating these things,
Is he paused for everybody else too?
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure that they will connect. He's on the iPad, so you know. I don't know all the details of the iPad, but
not happy. I say Bill couldn't even know. They said, "We want to lose everybody."
Yeah, he was gone for a long time too, so I don't know.
Oh, anyway, yeah. Somehow, so anyway, I can't even answer the question because I got tricked on our rhythm. But anyway, so there's ways in which we can do it. But the thing about it, to realize we're in an anti-African society, and when I say African and make that as a default, whether we choose Bakala or African or what have you, is that once we get to a point where we say this identity being identified with this group of people, and then there's a whole other discussion about this between race, ethnicity, and nationality. But with this group of people, and make it default, and then realize that there's diversity within that group of people, then we're okay. But it's very anti-African sentiment when you bring up any kind of feature that may, quote-unquote, be considered African or a phenotype or behavior. People have this strong aversion, especially from that group. We're going to have problems. And so we say, yeah, I'm an African, and then we go on.
iPad just doesn't want you to speak for very long, apparently.
Yeah, I think this the internet is COINTELPRO against any African sentiment. That's probably what's going on. So if anybody else want to address or attack this, Brother Baruti?
I don't know if y'all heard any of that.
No, you went out again. I don't know what's the deal.
I don't know if you heard any of that, but go ahead.
Brother Baruti, go ahead.
Well, I do think that we are capable of shaping and reshaping our image to others and to ourselves. And today, I think we have to find the institutions within our grasp and our access that we can use to shape our images and how we want to project ourselves to others as well as to ourselves. And of course, we project those images in the way we want to be seen, we will eventually, redirect the relationship. Because people's relationships with other people are certainly based upon how they see it. So when someone made the comment that, someone can deny that they're black or deny that they're African-American, but other people will see them as such or do see them as such and will treat them how they see them, then how that measured, and we are responsible for that shaping. One thing that I'd like to just add, something I said before, that maybe we can talk about at some point, is how can Africa be a resource And of course, Dr. Karanga, Maulana Karanga, talks a lot about that. But I think and then probably give us some hints at how we can reshape our image to others, which will affect our external relationship with others, as well as to our internal relationship within our individual self and to the selves within our community.
All right.
Can I add on to that?
Go ahead.
Well, it's very interesting because I don't think we have to sell ourselves in terms of images, and I don't mean it to kind of, assume that's what you meant. But they know the other side. They know both sides of the coin. They know how we're perceived and how we're presented and how we are. But there's an economics to having this perception. Hip-hop is a perfect example. It didn't start out where it is now. And there was a lot of pro-African movement, pro-sense of self. There's the same movement that happened in the 60s, came back to hip-hop. But there's a pushback because there's economic power and independence of the sense of thought. And I think we have to be aware that in the U.S. with the economic push, there is a lot of counter-push to this progress. It's not that we haven't thought of this before, that we are enough with the ability to explain to people how smart we are, and that people don't know that. The question is, what is the economic shift that will happen to this situation in the U.S. and globally when the people get together and realize that they do have power and they have numbers against the economic system that is exploiting them. And African-American consumers, that's the way we consume in this country. When we do the data, you ignore this population until it starts to do buy from black campaigns. And then all of a sudden they spend millions of dollars on getting us to be consumers again. And it's an amazing cycle. It's terribly documented. And they know the economic and the academic power. And that is the reason why we have to keep having these counter pushes in 15-year phases.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Add one. I think it's probably a fairly small thing. Just in terms of answering your question from my perspective, I think the short answer is yes, you can make those changes on individual levels. And I think we've seen that all through history, and we continue to see that today. When we have people who are clearly racist, but on an individual level, that is their relationship with a particular individual who may be black can be very different. So it's like there's this rule of exception. So it's not that people who are racist are incapable of seeing blacks in a different light or a black person in a different light. It's still trying to get past the stereotype of the larger group of people so that it's not an issue of just exceptionalism. Like, you're an exception to this because you're articulate, right? The favorite comment. And you're an exception to this because look at you. You're Dr. Ben Carson, you've done X, Y, Z, right? It's getting beyond seeing that, okay, there could be a few good ones in there. And I don't know how you get to where you can wipe the slate clean and say, well, everybody is equal and we can see everybody in the same way. I don't even know if our brains are built in that way to be able to even do that, just because we're hardwired to create categories. And I just in part think it's a natural thing that we do. Why we assign the feelings and the sentiments to those categories that we do, I'm not sure. That might be a different thing. But in my classes, I use a thought experiment, or at least in some of my classes, I use a thought experiment and say, what if the United States never had, there was never a slave trade, we didn't bring Chinese over to build railroads, there weren't Native Americans here that we didn't subjugate it. You take all that away, and all we have are white Europeans who came over to this country and settled it. Would there be discrimination of some sort? And the answer is that yes, there would be, because we as humans categorize people, and for whatever reason, then we make associations with what that means. So more than likely, if they're all white, then you'll have white men subjugating white women or vice versa. Somehow that's going to happen. Or it could be by where they came from in Europe, or there's something that you're going to do to, I mean, a good example that I use with my son is Dr. Seuss' story of, I can't think of what their names are, but it's the speeches, right? Mm-hmm. Where at one moment it's the speeches who have the dot on their stomach or whatever, they're the superior group. And then somebody comes along and says, I can make you just like them. And we'll give you dots on your stomach. And he gives them dots on their stomach. And then so all the sisters have dots on their stomach. Well, then the original who had the dots, they were like, well, let's take our dots off. They take their dots off, and this just goes back and forth, back and forth. And the only one profiting, of course, is the guy who's making the change. But the point is, there's still arbitrary distinctions, but they're arbitrary distinctions that we categorize and then place some sort of value on. And I don't know that it's possible to stop us from doing that.
Well, my feeling is, just in a nutshell, is that if Black people or African people, however we want to categorize ourselves, both in the U.S., Caribbean, Africa itself, work to change our views and values, even in terms of how we use resources, how we think of ourselves, and we use our resources properly, I think we should be on a course to make white supremacy domination or its effects past and present on us only a minor irritation or just irrelevant period. So I don't think we have to be permanently oppressed. I think we contribute to our oppression, and we're going to have to figure out a way to throw chains off of ourselves, and then we can take course toward not being in the position that we're in.
I'm glad that you actually all three of you. Yeah.
Let me say something real fast.
Okay.
The one of the things in this work that about identity that I'm finding is we're not asking the question why. We're really not getting to the, I guess, metaphysical part, I guess, in some ways. And in some ways, maybe if it's a lot of, I don't know, but why do you have these types of identities, and where are the benefits from these identities on various sides of the equation? And until we come down to the questions of why, like one of the arguments you made, we talked some time ago, is about when Burkina Faso was created, and when they came up with a name for the people, and it was a projection of what they wanted the people to be respected as and to aspiration to live up to, and you talked about that as part of the inspiration for how you approach the African-American ethnic group. And I understood that was in the context of a new nation state that has state power. And so when you have state power and you're another group of peers called other nation states, and you say, we're going to present ourselves as this, the other nation states respond because that you have a similar institutional apparatus that they see as legitimate. And so therefore they will do that. But if a small group of people...
No.
I'm just starting on. Well, this is interesting.
How horrible.
Because I thought about, it irritates me to no end every time I'm listening to some sort of world news thing, and they say Burma, also known as Myanmar, which clearly is something that a country's trying to project.
I have to get at the question, color or this technology still did not go away again?
Yeah, you went away again, and
all right. Well, every time I talk, I go away, so I'll shut up.
30 seconds left.
No.
I'll be quiet.
No, you have to be concise. Your time frame is measured by your computer.
Okay, we have to ask the question why. Question of whiteness, why does it dominate, why was it created, and then the question of why when we create some kind of identity or identity for our group.
So down to 10 seconds.
And what would make people buy in and participate in those identities?
Now, I want to go back to what Stephanie has introduced into the conversation, and that is hip-hop culture. And, you know, I grew up during the height, or what they call the golden era of hip-hop. And so, you know, I grew up in it understanding a certain philosophy that existed in the culture, not only as a listener of the music and observer of art, but actually being a participant in the expansion and solidification of the culture. And so I've always said for the longest that, you know, some of the pioneers from the beginnings in the golden era need to articulate, you know, the inner philosophy of hip hop culture. And a few have done that, you know, one with the RZA talking about Wu-Tang Clan, but my almost new favorite book, it has yet to trump Blueprint for Black Power, but it's definitely up there. And that is The Gospel of Hip Hop by KRS-One. And I love this book so much because he solidifies, to me, and I argue this, you know, and I guess this will be a different argument in of itself, that hip-hop is really the only bona fide culture that has arisen, and I'm speaking from the broader context of what culture is, that has arisen from African Americans, the population we know as African American. That'll be a different discussion. I know people have opposition to that statement, in which I have. But again, if you know, another time we can argue. But one of the things is that he argues in the book is that hip hop has been a self-defining cultural phenomenon. And every step of the way, since the beginning, they have defined themselves and moved under a particular ideal in which to move forward. Now, things have kind of changed as you know, over the years, which is a discussion in of itself. But it goes to, matter of fact, when me and Brother Baruti were testing the software the other night, you know, we had this long discussion, which included, you know, parts of this dialogue in which we're about to have now, is that, you know, the questions you have from the older generation, it seems, is that, you know, basically it seems to be this idea that we have to wait on a masses to get on board in order to do something or to be effective. And I noticed with people from my generation, Generation X, as they would call them, or what I call the hip-hop generation, is that we don't have those limitations. For us, we are people who just put it out there, do it, and make people with no apologies, and people are either going to accept it or they won't. And I think, you know, with me growing up in hip-hop culture and being a participant in that way, and especially dealing with the thing with identity, that it has kind of shaped, you know, how I approach this particular subject. Because just as Baruti said earlier, you know, for me the goal isn't really more so having other people love us. And I think that has limited us moving forward as a people, because for some reason in the conversations I have felt, for me as a hip-hopper and as a martial artist, it ain't about the love. It is about putting yourself in a position to where when somebody doesn't love you and wants to violate your sovereignty, you have the power to respond appropriately. And I think this is, and I bring up martial arts because that's what martial arts is. You know, it's not about, you know, who initiated the aggression. It's about when you're in the fight, can you defend yourself and neutralize, you know, that which is threatening your sovereignty. And so when we talk about identity and power, this is the perspective in which I'm coming from. So regardless of how white folks feel about us, they have to, because we have the necessary power to respond in an appropriate manner, they have to deal with us in a particular way. So it's just like the United States. You know, they could talk about China all day long. They could talk about dictatorship. They could talk about their form of governance. You know, we could talk about their people and how we don't like them and all this other kind of stuff. But China is positioned in a way that you have to respect them on the level as, you know, say in the States. You wouldn't, you know, the United States can run into and get Saddam Hussein easily, but they won't easily run up into China, you know, as quick as they would, you know, the Middle East and Afghanistan and stuff to this nation, because they have positioned themselves that they are able to defend themselves. And so when I think about Blueprint for Black Power as a foundational framework, you know, to move forward, this is the kind of sense that allows you to create certain types of motifs, certain types of perspectives that allow you to create services and products that are sellable. Now, I don't remember who addressed this earlier, but I think that culture is something that you sell. And so when I go to the movies and, you know, I'm going to watch a quote-unquote white movie, I'm going to watch white culture in action. When I go to eat food, I'm eating people's cultural food. When I go to the store, I see Hebrew Franks. You know, what is so special about hot dogs that they had to put their ethnicity on the Hebrew Frank? I mean, on the Franks. They're selling their culture. When I go watch martial arts movies, I'm going to watch Chinese, Japanese philosophy as it expressed through martial arts. Everything has to do with culture. So when you have a culture, you have a body, you have a framework in which to create products and services and to sell to other people. In order to build your economy. So if you don't have an identity, you don't have you don't have a basis for an economy. And so I just want to get y'all opinion, you know, on that. And anybody can, you know, kind of weigh in. You know, hopefully their video doesn't go out in the process of responding. Anybody?
Well, I'm seeing Sonja and Lasana being kind of fooling. I don't know if that's in progress. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I think it always goes back to economics. Right? That you're absolutely right. I mean, I actually study the martial sciences as well. And it is about understanding your lines. And there are some lines that you just don't cross, and no one crosses over that. And that is essential to understanding yourself. Yourself as both an individual and as a collective whole. What are the lines that we do not go below? What are the perceptions that we create for ourselves? And what does our land look like? You know, why is it essential for, I'm going to say, a gentleman came in here, a Jewish background, and he said, you have to go and find your own homeland. Because we cannot stay here and be persecuted and grow. Although, you know, I have my own opinions about how that all worked out, but the notion of going and having our homeland be a land where you can go back to find yourself and self-define is essential. Then you have the economics, because you have a culture to sell. Right now, we're regurgitating a misinterpretation of a fight against the way we were defined, as opposed to here is who I am and here is who we are. Period. If someone says that we're black and I'm not really black, I'm Coco, you know, or someone says that we're violent, then we go out of our way to show that we're calm. If someone says we're not educated, then we push that we're educated. You don't have to force your definition of who you are. we need to find a way economically, like you said, with goods and services, to sell within ourselves products, services, books, couches, pillowcases, shirts, shoes, that when you walk in the room, breathe and feel and define who you are. I see a Star David, it's over, I understand. I get it. I understand. But when I walk into the room, what does it mean based on what your shirt says and the colors that you're wearing? What does it mean to be whoever you are when you walk into space? And our clothes, our smells, our hairs, our shirts, our purses, our music, not 100% all day, every day, but the option to have that as a product is essential. That's what sold hip-hop. Others bought into that hip-hop culture. That's where the money came in. And when money came out of jazz, and people were buying into that culture, blues, and people were buying into that culture, R&B, and people were buying into that culture, then others took hold of it. And then they they rebranded it, and then they sold it back to us as something different than what it started as. And I think we got to find a way to take it, own it, hold it, and not let it be sold back to us differently than what it really is.
I have a question then based on that, because I'm wondering how you would do that, because what it brings to mind is Chris Rock's movie on hair. And one of the points that he talks about in there is, how is it possible that you have a product in part that's sold almost exclusively to black people, and black people don't control it? So if they can't control something that's as basic as, this is a product that we use almost exclusively, we don't have, one of the biggest things for me as a black woman when I moved around is trying to find a place to get my hair done. And it's just so difficult to get that done. And I'm like, if you're talking about something that black people have to pay for, right, why can't you find that? Where are the people who own that and define that? So I think you said something
Well, it's a perfect example. If you watch the new commercials, how many natural hairdos do you see on commercials in the last 6 months? They have seen this big chop come off, and everyone's doing it, and but they can't make money off of it. So now, if you look at Walmart and Target and Kmart, they are starting to bring Afrocentric oils and shea butters back because they have to find a way to make a commodity. So what we have to do is build that network from the growing space to the new space, knowing that people are looking to redefine themselves, that women are looking to get out of these products. And watch the commercials now. We don't have a sitcom or any major TV, but they are starting to see that they have to find a way to commodify this change that is happening. And I went to get my hair fixed, and the lady was like, "Oh my goodness, you have to love it. They have this new they have these new Afro weaves, right? You've seen everyone with these blowouts to here, because they're trying to they've already seen the movement, and they've created a product line to sell it back to us. Now, we know the movement before they do, and I think we can look at basic business marketing strategies and understand us in a way that can't be, someone in China cannot be manufacturing afros.
But I would like to agree with Stephanie to this extent on something you said earlier about culture being a marketable product or can be sold. I agree that culture can be marketed as an economic commodity, but I do think that, whether it's economic leverage or political leverage, to me, all of those things can't really take us to where we would probably like to be, and the culture is at the root of it. And to me, before, or a major component of culture to me is networking. I mean, I'm just kind of looking over some notes I put down about, for example, in one of Dr. Karanga's books called Introduction to Black Studies, he outlined 7 areas of culture. This is history, religion, sociology, politics, economics, creative product, creative production rather, and psychology. Okay, I agree with those, you know, as the basic building blocks of culture. I think networking. So, for example, if we have to find our own home, for example, African-American people, in the United States, I would say that would primarily be the South. But if the Black people really, you know, network together and probably really love ourselves and love our image, then maybe we would make a mass remigration back to the southern areas and make that more of a geopolitical space, you know. Then maybe that would be some move toward more sovereignty and more controlling our destiny, our image, and stuff. Maybe that would be our own home. But no people are going to find their own home, even in the perspective, unless they love themselves. And I would like to find a way that we can facilitate working and love of self, along with views and values of critique, you know, for ourselves, based upon some of the models that we may have talked about. And I think that's crucial from my vantage.
And it sounds like, based on that, that's what we could say with Asar's example of China, right? When we think of China, we think of something that's unified. We don't think of multiculturalism. We sort of, in the Chinese, right, the Chinese government has promoted this as a single society, even though we know that that's not really the case, right? Because for me, linguistically, the Chinese government says they only have one language and but 5 dialects, and that's just not true, at least not the way that we talk about what that has to do with what you said about sort of this marketing, but also this perception of there's a cohesive sort of group of people with an identity that's a very strong one, and they promote this identity as, you know, something in particular. And we can say that about others sort of more, not that they're monolithic, but that they're just portrayed as being monolithic, and that in itself presents this really strong identity. I think you can see pockets of that in the United States with different groups. So, for example, even though in Chris Rock's movie he presents it as a joke, there is something about it that anything that involves Black people, it happens in Atlanta first, right? That's where all the decisions about Black people are made, and then it just sort of goes out, right? But one of the things that we can think about when we think about Atlanta is Atlanta has a very strong Black power base. And so, to some extent, you can see that Detroit used to have that. I don't know if I'd say it still does, since Detroit as a society is disintegrating. But you can see pockets of political power or Blackness, or the same way as you can with other groups, across the United States. But it goes back to, I think that I like the example that Asar mentions with something like China as an example. If you present yourself as this cohesive front, in spite of the differences that really exist, and people want to downplay their differences and look at what brings them together, then sure you can do that.
I think that in part, one of the reasons why I brought up Harris One's book is because he solidified, you know, the meanings from he's a well-respected hip-hop pioneer that has been there from the beginning. And he's one of the founding people in various different moves in hip-hop culture, as one being the Stop the Violence movement and things of this nature. And he has put together, you know, a manifesto and a definition of what hip-hop culture is and things of that nature. And hip-hoppers, you know, this is the starting point for which, you know, people who identify with hip-hop culture can go and get some sense of foundation in the base in order to rally behind. And I think with African Americans, what my argument is that we need this particular type of definition and values that are written in code that, you know, most people can agree with. You know, even if, you know, like for instance, in the book Bakala of North America, I cite Dr. Wade Noble, and I was hoping I could get him on, but his schedule wouldn't allow him to do it today. He's a very well-known Black African psychologist, and he has articulated the qualifications, as I should say, it's a specific term that he uses that I want to talk about in terms of the African personality, and that is it's from his article, Utilizing Culture in the Achievement of Educational Excellence for African American Adults, from Cultural Precepts and Reoccurring Themes. And when it comes to identifying the personality of African Americans from his psychological investigation, he's come up with several precepts and themes. I'm just going to read off the 8 precepts real quick, and this is what I rallied the name in which I gave what I suggested for African Americans around in terms of a value system. I'm not going to read all of them in detail. I'm just going to read the name. So, consubstantiation, which asserts that all things in the universe have the same essence. This precept refers to the notion that pervades the African ethos, that all elements of the universe are of one substance, spirit. 2, interdependence, asserts that everything in the universe is connected. This precept represents the African's understanding of and respect for his ontological origins and cosmological relationships. 3, egalitarianism, asserts that the correct relationship between people is one of harmony and balance. 4, collectivism, asserts that individual effort is a reflection and or instrument of communal and collective survival advancement. 5, transformation, asserts that everything has the potential to continually function at higher levels. 6, cooperation, asserts that the optimal way of functioning is within mutual respect and encouragement. 7, humanness. Humanness asserts that the whole world is vitalistic, alive, and that the vitality is grounded in a sense of goodness. And 8, synergism, asserts that the performance outcomes of cooperative effort will be greater than the sum total of individual effort. From there spawns 9 reoccurring themes. And that is, I'll just say, spirituality, resilience, humanism, communalism, orality and verbal expression, personal style and uniqueness, realness, emotional vitality, and musicality and rhythm. And so when he's arguing that, you can kind of sum up the spirit of African American, he does it under these 8 precepts and 9 reoccurring themes. And I think that if people understood and was able to read this and, debate it, argue it, meditate on it, and rally behind this, then you have the basis, for your identity. It's just a matter of finding a label that represents all of these different things. And of course, I go through the book, giving examples of how this is a reality in a historical context. But again, when it comes to the things like with China, for instance, they have this manifesto. They have these value systems, which are written by Joel Kotkin, and it's called Tribe. And he talks about how ethnicity, race, and religion are the foundations and basis for power in the world. And so there's several chapters that deal with the diaspora. For instance, like with the Jews, how they still have an identity and it is strong amongst them, but they don't, prior to 1946 or so, 47, had a homeland. And all throughout, he talks about the 5, tribes that are prepared to be successful in the 21st century. That is the English, that is, the British, the English, the British, the Chinese, the Japanese, Indian, and who am I missing? Baruti. The Jews. And the reason is because, as he argues, is they have a strong ethnic identity, and their ethnic identity is not localized to a specific place. They can go anywhere in the world, and because they rally behind this identity and a certain value set, it becomes a source of power, and they create these large global networks. So when you talk about Chinese, you cannot talk about Chinese simply in China. You know, Chinese are global people, and they honor themselves as Chinese. Same thing with Japanese and the Indians. And it's because of their strong ethnic identity that they are able to move in the world in the way that they do. And so, you know, I think even though we don't necessarily have our own homeland, that if we, you know, create a strong culture, and I like how Dr. Amos Wilson articulates this concept when he talks about that culture is a conspiracy, which means that it is something that people do consciously. It is, you know, culture doesn't grow in a field. Culture doesn't, you know, fall from the sky. It is something that human beings get together in meetings and they create. And so, you know, at some point, if we want to change our economic and political condition, we're going to have to meet on this issue of culture, and we're going to have to set the guidelines and the precedents for the development of the culture. And we're going to have to present it out there like hip-hoppers do with no apology, and just move forward, you know, and adjust and as time goes on. You know, I'm a computer programmer, so, you know, we have this thing when we're developing software, you know, you have the alpha stage, you have your beta stage, and you have your candidate release stage. And, you know, you have all these different stages, but they don't wait till the product is perfect before they present it out there. They present it out there in stages so people can come together and test the software, so to speak. And if they find any bugs, then, you know, of course, we report it, and we adjust the software in a bit to accommodate, you know, and to correct those bugs. So when we have a final release, you know, we've gotten most of the bugs out of the way. And I think this is the way that we can approach this cultural development, from which, you know, you set in stone your values, so to speak. So like with the Jews, their stuff is set in stone. It's written in the Bible, you know, so they rally behind all the things that are in the Bible. That's their history. If we can, you know, rally behind something, you know, in terms of these ideas, I think that we can move forward. Does anybody have anything to say? Go ahead.
So I have a quick question or comment.
Go ahead.
The first question I'd like to ask is, who was the person on the panel that mentioned about a Jewish person mentioning that African-American people would have to find their homeland? Who mentioned that?
That was Stephanie.
Me, sorry, Ray.
Okay, great. Stephanie, I'm going to ask you a question, but first, I'm sorry, I want to just make a quick comment response to what you just mentioned.
Go ahead.
It seems like when Lasana was talking earlier, that he was saying, regardless of whatever name we chose to identify ourselves, it doesn't seem to go anywhere unless it's connected to power. I hope that's not a mischaracterization of what he was saying, but you seem to be suggesting that, well, picking a proper identity, I guess with the proper precepts that you outlined from Wade Noble, will actually provide the apparatus and the conduit to which power can be created. Now, maybe those are not flip-side arguments between both of you, but I think those have to be discussed perhaps at a later level. Which comes first, identity to create power, or power in parallel with identity, you know, equals development and forward motion. But the question I had for Stephanie was, since you had mentioned that this particular Jewish person was mentioning that African-American people had to find their own homeland, what would that mean to you, that we would have to find our own homeland? Where would that be? And what would that mean in your view for Jews, since all Jews don't live in Israel? What does Israel mean for them, for those who don't live there, in terms of their own leverage outside of whatever they would call Israel? And is Liberia, in your mind, some kind of place that was originally thought of as being some kind of homeland?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I used to do branding for the Anti-Defamation League, which is one of the largest, it's like the NAACP for the Jews. You know, it's kind of their cultural base. And the fact that they were branding branding their culture is very telling. Now, although they might not all live in Israel, there is a major percentage of Americans that have dual citizenship from both Israel. You know, there is this opportunity to kind of go, regroup, rebuild, and come back home. And I don't know, for those of us who have friends who have homes abroad, or they might be West Indians, or they might be from, South Africa. There is this sense that you have a place as an option. In the case of this country is becoming too much, or hey, I'm being targeted, or every time I wear my hood, I get chased. Well, I have an opportunity to escape that. Now, I have the option to take it or not take it, but at least I have an option. So if I can have dual citizenship as a part of an African-American experience, that truly gives me an African-American experience, that I can freely go between both and call both of them home. And that is, I'm not against how it works, but when we talk about our mission and the Jews or the Portuguese or whatever, there is this mandate that the Chinese people might not have it, but the power seekers, the leadership, has a strategic purpose for why they unify. So if we are to say, well, what is the purpose in this unification, and what are our 5 objectives, both spiritually, economically, sort of brick and mortar, that all the people can kind of rally under. If I'm an artist, how do I get into this movement? Well, because when we're building brick and mortar, we need to have some sort of creative understanding of the space. There has to be some way that I can fit into a larger purpose, both here and wherever in whatever particular region we call home, that my dual citizenship can have purpose, that I can use my specific talent as an individual for this collective whole, as the Jewish population has done, as the Swedish population has done, as groups that identify themselves based on a nationality or a culture. They still have physical purpose in terms of building up land, building up e-commerce, building up commerce, building up business. So it's not that I run from America to say, Marcus Garvey has points. I'm not saying that you just own one to have another, but the option to have it as a dual understanding of who I am, I should feel comfortable in both, because I am of both.
Where's that for you? Where's that for you? Is it one place, or is it multiple homes?
In terms of
that you think we should.
Well, as with the Jews, where do they find a space that they consider to be best theirs? I don't have the answer for that, but I do know sort of culturally and regionally there are those who have more experience in Africa who might be able to better decide our lineage, but or the best place to call home, or multiple countries within. Maybe it's individually or collectively, but there has to be a space. And no, I don't. In a short answer, I don't know the exact sort of coordinates of what that space is, but I think finding that space gives us a collective purpose. Where would we create that would give us a dual citizenship? Where on this planet, if the world was ours, where would we collectively know that we can come together in confidence that we could solve our problems in this space and build our future in this space, and everyone of a particular nationality, as with Chinese and Asian, and Korean, that they can go back home and know that I can always fit back in here. And that could be one of the objectives that we work on, is where is that space?
So for you, what you find with Tre?
Hold on, Brother Baruti. Let Ms. Lanehart get in, and then we'll get back to you.
I think that's one of the big problems. Is another one of my pet peeves that I have, that we look at, that society often looks at Africa as if it's just one country, and it's not. It's multiple countries.
No, it's not.
And they're very different. And I think that's where part of the problem is. You're right, China has a space and identity and stuff like that. And we can say, like in my earlier comment, it's like I would identify as African-American and Black if you're talking about race. But, and I can say I have this ancestry in Africa. Well, that's a big place. And where is that? I have absolutely no idea. And I think that's a huge problem if we're talking about, I think that's a problem with how we even started this discussion in trying to, problem in terms of how do we figure it out kind of thing. That is, how can we figure out this identity, that specifically, and what you're talking about, beyond just a sort of a larger category, an umbrella term like just like African? When Africa is so many different things, and we don't even know. Right? And how many Black people can even tell you what all the countries in Africa are? Right? We just don't know. So I think it just becomes so obscure. It's just hard to make that kind of identification.
What if we make it?
Why does it never come up when somebody says European, someone says Chinese? We just accept it, and in this conversation in and of itself has been a lot of allusion to the Indians or the Chinese, or there's different provinces, different cultural groups, but they present themselves as a particular group, and we accept that because we assume, I guess, there's certain shared experiences, or there's shared customs across the various diverse expressions of what it means to be Chinese. So that's why those of us who are part of the Pan-African Project argue that African is a suitable term, because we don't have to know all the idiosyncrasies, all the nuances, and all the individual nation states and cultural groups, because we deal in the geopolitical world like that all the time. We don't say the Chinese, but we say the Indians. We say, even in this context, the indigenous, although there is not one type of indigenous person to North America. So that's where we have a problem, is that when the African comes up, then it becomes a very nuanced, very specific and detailed conversation. So we don't get into that with other groups, because we're not even talking about African in that sense of knowing every single language, every single custom, or a trace on the map. We're talking about a unified set of characteristics that we want to present to the world that defines us in our humanity.
But it makes a difference because in China sees itself as a unified entity. It's been a history in terms of where the government reacts. That's not the case in Africa.
That's governmental. That's not the people. That's why you still have issues with that. And you have issues with Korea. You have issues with other places. Because China, that we know, is a part of an imperialist project as well. So if you go and talk to individual Chinese, a lot of people have resentment as saying they're Chinese. But we get a government position which is different than the people's.
And a perfect example of that is America. How many Americans, black, white, brown, or other, know every state, every city, every capital in their own country, let alone from the outside looking in? How many Northern Americans want to be remotely identified with being Southern? I think recently, in terms of branding, the world thinks that America stands united, when actually internally, someone from Austin is not going to say they're from Biloxi, Mississippi. That's not me. You know what I mean? I come up very different. So I think within our own current nation, there are unspoken understandings of lines, but there's a collective governmental, as Lasana said, sort of branding of who we are. Although individually and personally and regionally, we're very, very, very distinctly different, and we don't even understand our own land. in terms of who we are regionally and all of our cities and our state birds and all. But the notion that there is a space that is ours is still important.
When I moved from California to Texas when I was a teenager, I went back to California for a visit. I had some New Tennessee, and this is in the United States of America. I went from California to Texas, New Tennessee. My friend said, "Where do you get those at?" I said, "I got them at Foot Locker." I said, "Wow, they got Foot Lockers in Texas?" So some people can think that Texas is a bunch of ranches and horses and tumbleweed in the United States. Imagine the kinds of imaginations that people have about places outside of the United States. When people say, "Wow, they have Foot Lockers in Texas," so yeah, they have malls. They have malls in Texas. I mean, so this is just within the context. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is not just kind of Dr. Lanehart. I understand exactly the points you're making. What I'm saying is that the Pan-Africanist Project is not about geography, and it's not about when I first deal with I got a presentation called "You're Black Now What?" And I deal with 3 issues: what's the difference between nationality, ethnicity, and race. A very loose sense that those are very loaded terms. Except for nationality, we pretty much know what a nation state is. But I say, put a picture of Femi Kuti, who's from Nigeria, who comes from a Yoruba background. I put a picture of Mama Africa in South Africa, and I believe she's Dosa. I put a picture of Jomo Kenyatta from the Lindy people in Kenya, and I put a picture of Anwar Sadat, who at one point was the head of state of Egypt. I say they all have different religions, they all speak different languages, they all have different customs. Which one is the real and which one is the most African? Who's the most authentic African? Is it Anwar? Is it Jimmy? Is it Mary McCable? Or is it Jomo Kenyatta? And like, no, people say, no, none of them are more African. I said, but they all have different languages. They all have different religions. They all have different cultures. They all have different ways in which they express their Africanity. But they are African people, and there are things that tie them. And the same thing with the African in Jamaica, and African in Haiti, African in America. That's the Pan-Africanist Project, where we're saying that in the diaspora, we are an African people, as if you want to use the lower term, as a race. And then we can go into what makes a person distinctly African-American, what makes a person Bantu, what makes a person Eze, what makes a person Jamaican, what makes a person Afro-Brazilian. But over the umbrella, we have the African race, then we have these unique experiences across the world, then we go and we have those. The same thing with a Chinese person born in Chengdu versus a Chinese person born in Hong Kong versus a Chinese person born in San Francisco. They're all Chinese. Well, get that out the way. We're Chinese. But me being raised in San Francisco is different than me being raised in Hong Kong, which was held by the British until 2000.
Oh, we lost you.
But we're Chinese to agree on that. Still to get into the nuance. And that's the kind of where I'm at.
And I also, one of the things I add to that is, goes back to my earlier definition when I was talking about identity. It has to be a two-way street. And one of them is how you see yourself, and are you accepted in that group? And then how society sees that, and how society defines that particular group. And that's why I go back to, we have, it's a creative problem in the sense that China has resolved its issue for the time being because of, in part, its government and how it defines people. We already know there's different regions and different countries or whatever, but China insists we are all Chinese, and everything that comes through there this is how it's presented. And that's not the case for Africa. It's not the case within Africa in the sense of we have 2 different warring communities going on right now all over in different places in Africa who can make these subtle distinctions that if you or I were looking could never tell. Like, why are you saying that these 2 are different people, right, and warring against one another? And that's part of my issue is that we don't see those subtle distinctions. We just say it's Africa. But Africa is not just Africa, right? If we look at how outside defines it, we have the Middle East. You mentioned Anwar Sadat, right? This is another one of my pet peeves, that Middle East is not part of Africa, right? It always sort of gets separated. And it's not, it's sort of seen as this sort of unified blanket place in the terms of how we talk about it, but it's not. And I think those things are important. You're right. I think I can remember somebody used the example of Europe earlier. most people who, Caucasians don't generally find themselves as European, or they don't even like the term Caucasian or European American. I remember using that term before, and this group of white people, they were looking at me like, what are you talking about? They would be more likely to say I'm Irish or I'm Italian descent or I'm whatever descent. So even they can sort of pick a defined space. Europe is not their home, right, or their homeland or their ancestry. It's some particular place. And I think it just complicates it at the very least.
But the reason why they do that is because whiteness in America trumps all that other.
Right. I agree.
All true.
White privilege trumps that, so they have that luxury. As an African, as a part of the group that's at the bottom of the pigment carcass, this is the different kind of ways. So when we make a comparative analysis to other groups, and most of the time when we talk about this, we use a comparative analysis to our Jewish relatives. And I understand the parallel and why that comes up. So I talk about these things within the context. That's why I always go back to the why. The reason why a person would say, no, I don't see myself as a European American or et cetera, is because whiteness, and that's the great thing about the way they created whiteness. I strongly encourage you to read Nell Irvin Painter's book, The History of White People. The way they created it is that it becomes a default group where you don't have to have any racial identity. White people aren't used to talking about themselves in the terms of a race because it's become normalized in the default for what it means to be human. And so that's why they say, why do you have to have a black organization? Why do you have to have a black da-da-da? Why can't you just be a part of the regular? Because the regular is the dominant, and the dominant is the norm, and the norm is the default. And so when we're talking about our identity as a collective, there is a place for exactly what you're talking about, breaking it down to those very essential elements. But there also is a place to elevate it, to say, this is what it means to be African. Just like even if people don't want to be called European, and when we talk about European, most of the people are Western European. They're not Eastern European. And Eastern Europe is a totally different world than Western Europe, especially in power and dynamics. And really, Eastern Europe was a labor force and a slave labor force, and also a group to be dumped upon. That's why they have their quote-unquote ethnic cleansing and all this stuff like other places in the world who had to deal with the leftovers from Western Europe and America. So when we say African, we are saying it not as a attempt to either get away from something or to try to quote-unquote make up something that doesn't exist. There are certain types of things that make African people, and we have a right to decide that, just like Europeans have monopoly, because the Greeks were not Greeks. Historically, there were Spartans, there were Athenians. They didn't even agree with the philosophy. That's why they killed all the philosophers or sent them off into exile. Europe was not Europe. It was full of people of Visit, Gauls, or what have you. So what I'm talking about in the world in which we present in the project, they didn't realize there's more value to present. Even though they've had European world, global imperialist World I, European imperialist World War II, they still position themselves as a united front, even though they're naming and killing each other on who's going to dominate and how they're going to dominate. Right? Because they understand as a project, that is a project academically, and as far as power, it's better to present it as that. When you see a picture of President of the United States sitting next to Winston Churchill, sitting next to Stalin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they all sitting there presented this united front. After they just got through bombing all of people together, right? And so we're saying that as an African project, we present ourselves as we're African, then we get into the nuances after that, instead of working and saying, well, let's get through the nuances. Because what I'm saying is that it's been a strategy to constantly point out the differences in African people to maintain the hegemony of European people. That's a strategy, to constantly talk about how we are not a unified people.
All right. I know Dr. Lanehart has to leave, and we kind of started late because of testing and technical difficulties and power outages in this realm. So I will give her a final word before she leaves us. And so go ahead.
That's unfortunate. This is it's an interesting discussion, and I appreciate the comments that Lasana made. I could see that we could sort of go on with this, but part of it is, you're right, it's very complicated. One of my earlier, my master's was on medieval studies, and so I looked at the history of the English language. So you're right, it's a complex thing that's occurred in Europe itself. But it's a history that has developed, and we only know it from what we can see right now, right? Nobody talks about the Anglo-Saxons and the Jews and looks at talks about Old English. We don't talk about Europe in that way anymore. So what we're seeing right now in the present and how we look at Europe and what it is, I think we're going to have to start from there because that's what people are working with. And if we look at it from that particular perspective, I think you're right. Whiteness is, I used to do, I haven't done it since I've been here, but a class experiment that I would do when I taught my language in the African-American community class. And not the thought experiment, I'm sorry. But it was a sort of this circle concept of where you have whites and blacks, because at the University of Georgia, that was pretty much it. Rarely would I have someone who was Latina or anything else, right? So it's black and white. And the white students never could identify themselves as white, right? It just didn't happen. The black students immediately were black, right? Regardless of where we came from or whatever, we're black. Now, any nuances beyond that could become problematic, but they did talk about certain experiences that were clearly shared, like, being followed in the store or whatever, very typical thing. Well, white students could not, I don't care how far the conversation went, they could not do that. They could not, I'm female or I'm Georgia or whatever, but none of those sorts of things.
I'm a blonde.
The luxury that the power group has isn't necessarily a luxury that we have. And I think if you're trying to create an argument to move yourself outside of those constraints, I guess I see it as you can't use the master's tool to defeat the master, right? You have to, it's the sort of same thing that we deal with in society. We have to be better, right, in order to be mediocre, right, or at least seen as mediocre. We have to be excellent in order to just get to that level. And I think the same thing happens with here. We have to be able to make those sort of clear identities for ourselves, despite what happens outside of that group, but still realizing that society still makes particular sorts of assumptions. And so we can deal with our half of the identity equation, that is who we are, where we come from, how we see ourselves, who's in that group. I think it's going to be difficult to move that conversation to where you want it to be.
All right. Well, we thank you, Dr. Lanehart, for engaging with us in this lively discussion, and we hope in the future that you can join us for more discussion as we think of stuff to talk about. Huh? Oh, you're welcome. And hopefully we won't have as much technical difficulties. Again, this is my first time using this software, so I'm getting to know it. And by the next time it'll be a full, cable production, with all of us, But we appreciate you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
I was talking to you. So I have to go too. So how are we going to wrap it up?
All right, I'll ask one last question in regard to this, and I'll let each of y'all weigh in on it, and then we'll wrap up with a final word. But in the discussion, Dr. Lanehart talked about bless you.
Yeah, the force be with you.
Dr. Lanehart talked about not necessarily knowing the specific background in terms of African Americans and historically beyond slavery and in terms of identification. Now, me personally, I think that we have enough history and enough creative input that in terms of population-wise, that we can be and are our own entity within a larger, African context. But of course, part of being African American is living with this memory loss of exactly where our individual families come from. Now, technology, here's where the question comes in. Technology now has allowed us to be able to trace at least into the general area of where our maternal and paternal ancestries derive, at least within the past 500 years. I, for instance, have taken the maternal and paternal test. Maternally, I'm from Mozambique. Don't know specifically where. Paternally, I'm from Western Europe. Don't know from particularly where. The haplogroup that defines my paternal is a very common haplogroup amongst the Southern British, the French, the Basque, and the Spaniards. So it wasn't specific. But my family originating from Louisiana, I'm going to say, and plus our native last name, I'm going to say that they were British. Well, actually, excuse me, Scottish. But anyway, so the question comes now that how does, since we have this we have this ability now to trace our ancestry, and some of us may have ancestry in areas where we thought we didn't have ancestry. You know, how does this play for those of us who have actually taken the DNA ancestral test and are able to pinpoint at least the general area? Some people have been able to get information on specific groups because their haplogroups are so unique. But for the most part, we can at least get to the region. So I know on my African side that, you know, if I was still in Africa, I'd be a Bantu speaker in Southeast Africa for the most part. And but there's this European aspect of it that, you know, and according to mine, this was during slavery. So I doubt that this was a mutual relationship that went on at this particular time. But, you know, that is biologically, you know, part of the makeup. So how does the technology now affect our identity and us trying to create an identity for ourselves as African Americans? What is, if we are multi-genetic, you know, how does that affect us coming together as one group of people? And I'll let Baruti start off.
Well, my thing is, even if people are able to trace the genetic origins on mother and father's side, I mean, still, we know that, you know, there's power in being part of a group. So, thanks to you, Asar, you know, you mentioned that, you know, at some point you ancestors on the African side were Mozambican. All of you speak down, you can't even name to most of these African countries are fake anyway. So therefore, for the most part, we really don't have a good place to start in that regard, because we could be somewhere any place in Africa going back to language group. But the whole thing is now, I think the Pan-African identity, we know our particular frame, is hooked up in terms of collective groups. So the ideas that you mentioned from Wade Noble, I think, are important to look at our collective now and figure out who we are at this point. And I'll give two examples. One, in Tanzania made up of about 150 ethnic groups, or the area of Tanzania now made up of 150 ethnic groups, is of little importance because most people speak Swahili and they identify themselves as part of the nation Tanzanian as opposed to particular ethnic groups. So there, they've been able to use the language in that particular Swahili to help avert, you know, a lot of ideas about ethnic conflict. But in the larger sense, in the East African community, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi have formed a federation where they're seeking to basically become East African, to drop the significance of ethnicity and drop the real significance eventually of the nation state to become, you know, East African by region. So in that sense, maybe we should look at the following of that kind of model. It's about the collective that a Pan-Africanist says. That's from my perspective.
All right. Who else wanna?
Anthony? From the Tre?
Okay. Well, I think the notion of Pan-Africanism is essential to our survival as a people. And if we could say that the oldest life on the planet originates from Africa, I think everybody can claim home, regardless of what is now really skin color. If you take a European and give them the same test, and they were able to prove that they are actually from, West Africa, which one would they pick? They'd pick the one with the best brand. And it would be the more European model versus the one that they genetically might have more in terms of, sort of genetic makeup. So if we take what Europe has done well, if you look at the Dark Ages and you look at the worst times in their history, and then you look at the major wedding of whoever, the prince and the princess who just got married, they've completely transformed what they actually were to this new myth of what they currently are. And for the number of billions of people that tune into their life and spend money on this myth, the formula is already there. So they took a society, they took a culture that had established an understanding and a brand and a power, an economic base, and a life, deconstructed it, reappropriated it to themselves, and created this amazing, extraordinary legacy based off of a legacy that was there. So when it comes to redefining sort of Pan-Africanism, defining self, defining individual groups within those groups, there has been a formula that has been done multiple times that we can follow, that we created in the first place. And sort of saying, here is who we are individually, collectively as a whole, here is our collective purpose, and this is why we must invest in this vision for our collective whole for the sake of survival. Europeans did it. America does it now, pretending that we all get along. Thank goodness television came out, because the world would have never known that we were here being beaten by dogs and eaten alive and abused, and Trayvon Martin happens every day. If it wasn't for the media, we would be perceived as China is perceived. And I think we have to take ourselves as a nation does and build in the belief system and the, sort of public showing of who we are going to be, and then we grow into that. Europe grew into this myth, and it has now become our perception. But how the king and the queen, that whole notion is America, so 1% that control. But what about the masses? Well, if we were to show the masses in Europe, well, that wouldn't be anything that most people would want to be a part of. Living on top of each other, small quarters, sort of their own personal infighting, but that is not the myth. And I think we are creating a reality, and then people grow into the reality. Hip-hop cultures, hey, no, can't sound, so-and-so, plain language. People bought into it, and they switched from what it was. And I think we have the capacity to understand this and to create a new myth and to create a new reality, and then grow into that reality.
All right.
I think the genealogy stuff is nice. It's answer some questions that people may want to have individually. I don't think it does much for a Pan-African project. I mean, you were to do my genealogy and you didn't show up a significant amount of indigenous American blood, I wouldn't believe it, because I know the direct descendants. But my life lived is not as a native. My life lived as an African-American, as a Black American. I'm clear on that. But it'd be nice to, go to where the Shawnee are and meet with them, and then if there's some kind of West African or some Irish or what have you, that's great too, and I can go and drink green beer, I guess. I don't know. I think individually, but collectively, it becomes sometimes more divisive than it is unifying. You guys are familiar with James Meredith, the brother who integrated Ole Miss?
I'm not.
James Meredith is the guy who integrated Ole Miss, and what he did was, was part of that whole project where black people were integrating Southern institutions, and then basically he did what he called a march against fear. You should look this up on the internet when you get a chance. March against fear, and basically it's going to be a one-man march across the South. And about a few hours into the march, he was shot with a shotgun. The march didn't last too long, and he was shot down. He survived it, and you have to see the picture on the internet. It's tragic that he got shot, but it's hilarious. March against fear, it didn't last that long. And and that was led to the march that Dr. King and Kwame Ture led, where the whole Black Power, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, James Meredith, who integrated Ole Miss and had federal authority, into the school. James Meredith, who said he was going to do a march against fear by his damn self and got shotgun. To this day, does not claim that he's a black man. He's an Indian.
He's what?
A Native American. When he goes and does public speeches, I'm more Indian than I'm anything else. And he may actually have an argument. He may be actually trace his bloodline to the Native American. But if integrating Ole Miss, getting shot against the march against fear, which led to one of the largest mass demonstrations in American history, is not the African-American experience, I don't know what is. I don't know what more of a black experience you can have in the 60s in the South. But his individual identity, he refuses to do that. And this is what I'm talking about, the whole concept of customized individualization. It has a place for it, and there's some advantages to that. But when it comes to collectively organizing people, power, and for agency, it becomes problematic. So I know that we all have various heritages, and we all have various cultural backgrounds. And some people, heritage mix is more direct. They may have one parent from one cultural group and one from another group. Then you start getting into all these old racialized categories. Do we go into the one-drop rule, or do we quote-unquote pick? But I think for the purposes of what we're talking about, and we're talking about this white world dominance, where this group of people have decided that they can go unbossed and unchecked and destroy the entire face of the planet Earth through global warming, through pollution of the water, through nuclear meltdown, through the facilitation of oil spills and all of those kind of things, and no other group of people make bombs that can kill them, that can destroy the world 13 times over. And we have to live under this rule and under this governing. We don't have a system to check them, to call them, say, hey, we're human beings too, and we're part of the human family, and we're going to put a stop to this. I think that's the goal for harmonious human relationships, and that's why I'm part of the Pan-African Project, because we need a response to this hegemonic rule by these people who, for the most part, are destroying humanity and destroying they get for authority. So we need to have authority to put a stop to this stuff, because this is destroying the globe, our home, the third rock from the sun. And so this is the broader reason why I'm a part of this.
And it looks like
Awesome.
we lost him again. But he'll probably come back in full force a little later. But just wanted to say thank you all for
but can I be a part of the group of people who can put the stop to this man? I'm pretty sure y'all didn't get any of that.
Yeah, we lost you for it. It was the longest we had you, but then we lost you. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure y'all didn't get any of that, but that's okay.
We got a lot. We got your purpose and your point. It was well done. It stopped right at the end of a sentence, so it was great.
Okay. Did y'all get the global warming and the?
Yeah, we got all the global warming.
All right, let's wrap this up because I have to go. But I really appreciate it, and I look forward to doing it another time.
Yeah, that's what we were doing. So I just want to thank y'all for taking the time out on y'all busy Sunday to engage in this dynamic discussion. So Again, introducing Brother Dr. Baruti Katembo, soon to be doctor in sometime in the near future, Lasana Hotep, and we'll just throw a soon to be. We're gonna get you in there. We need some more doctors in publication. So Sister Stephanie Coleman, and who left earlier was Dr. Sonja Lanehart at UTSA. So thank y'all again for engaging with me in this discussion, and hopefully we'll have it up soon to where y'all can view and critique, and join us next time for whatever name we decide to call this gathering. And I am Asar Imhotep, and I'm out. Peace. Thank you all.
Yeah.